Hi, my name is Yvette Ortiz, and I would like to present the second half of my lesson plan, sections 4 through 6. To begin, section 4, activities. What activities do I have planned? The initial activity will include a short discussion to cover pertinent terms and introduce the short stories that will be used for the lesson. Since the students will be reading to themselves first, we will discuss the best techniques to read effectively and efficiently. I think it's important for students to have modeling as far as how they should read in order to do so effectively and to be able to help each other, since they will be working with a partner in getting the task completed in the allotted amount of time. Next, we will read a small segment of the story and discuss our perceptions of the excerpt. As the students complete the guided practice, they will transition into independent practice. They will then listen to the same excerpt and provide their reactions from the position of a listener. To complete the guided practice, we will quickly compare and contrast the experiences. This will conclude the portion of modeling. They'll be able to experience what they will need to be discussing from the perspective of the class doing it as a whole. So they'll be able to read a short excerpt and discuss how to read closely, and then they'll be able to listen to that same excerpt and compare the differences in experience from being a listener and being a reader. Next, the independent portion will begin, so students will read silently the initial short story, A Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe, and discuss their reaction to the reading with a partner. So at this point, they will be sitting next to their partners, so if someone gets stuck on a word or anything like that, they'll be able to help each other out, but still complete the task of reading silently. Students will then listen to the same story and will be grouped into small groups to discuss their reactions. This activity will be timed in order to provide students with a measurable window in which to complete their discussion. I think it's important to keep students on track by giving them an allotted amount of time in which to complete their discussion. That way, they don't have the opportunity to deviate and to get off task, since they know they will be held accountable for their work in the allotted amount of time. Next, class will come together and report back their group discussions. At this point, their group discussions will finalize the portion of A Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe, and any gaps in the discussion can be filled at that time. Once that is completed, students will be introduced to a second short story. At this point, they've been modeled. They have modeling of the exercise. They will have practice independently. They will have worked with a partner and a small group. Then we will begin the process again. And at this point, the students will be able to complete the entire task on their own with their partners and then in a small group. And that will allow me sufficient time to follow up with students who perhaps struggled while working with A Telltale Heart. So the next story will be The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. Once they begin this story, they will repeat the initial grouping cycle with partner work followed by small group discussion. Closing, students will once again report back their findings with the second story, and any additional questions will be posed by students and teacher to ensure any gaps in group discussions are covered. Now, I realize that these are two different texts that they're going to be working with, and the reason I chose to do this is my classes will be in a block schedule, so I will have 96 minutes of time with the students. And I think that would be sufficient amount of time in which they can work with two different stories, truly be able to work on explaining their experiences and interacting with the class. So by doing it twice and having them do the activities two different times with two different stories, it'll give them the opportunity to practice. Now, as far as a formative assessment, there will be continuous assessment throughout the lesson, but there will be an independent assessment, and this will be in the form of a journal entry, which will be graded for individual comprehension. And at this point, the students have had the opportunity to work with partners, to work in small groups, to discuss the texts as a class, to discuss the audio as a class. So at this point, their journal entry should reflect their complete comprehension or if there are any students who need follow-up, or if there are any segments of this activity that these activities that the students didn't quite comprehend, then we'll have the opportunity to follow up. Now, why have I chosen these activities? I have chosen these activities because I feel they will best allow for a scaffolded lesson that will allow students to compare and contrast their findings independently with a partner in small groups and with the entire class. These activities will guide students through a successful completion of their projects. And like I said, giving them the opportunity to practice is I think, key, because repetition is how we learn. Now, as far as materials, what materials will I use for this lesson? Pencils. Students will need to each have their own pencil. They will need to have a loose leaf paper for student use. Partner and group activities so that they can take notes on their experiences as the lesson progresses, and also so they can jot down what they discuss as a group. Chart paper, one sheet, will be used at the beginning of class during the whole class discussion to introduce the lesson, in which we will list pertinent literary terms that they can use during their discussion. Also, one sheet will be needed for the report back activity. And since we will have 2 report back activities, I intend to divide that sheet, just put a line through the middle and do the first report back session on the top portion of the sheet and the second report back session on the bottom portion. And the reason I want to do that is I don't want to overwhelm them with a lot of writing. I want us to be able to just do a quick report back activity where we can list the most important information. Markers, I will need markers for my own use as we do the whole group discussions. We will need copies of both stories, Edgar Allan Poe's A Telltale Heart, as well as Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. There will be approximately 26 students. So I would need one copy for each student, and then of course a copy for myself. That way, as I'm walking around, I have a copy readily available. Digital recordings of each short story, which will be used by the entire class. Laptop and speakers with which to produce the digital recordings. And then of course students should already have their journals at their desks, so when it comes time to do the independent evaluation, they don't have to disrupt the process. They can just transition into the independent evaluation and complete the assigned task. Now, why have I chosen these materials? I have chosen these materials because they're the most conducive to student learning and in helping students achieve their learning objectives for the lesson. The students will have their own copies of each text in order to read independently and to assist them in discussing the text. Part of the discussion of how to read effectively will be to jot down or annotate their copy of the text as they read. Anything that they might find interesting, they can quickly and easily underline it. They will have copies that they can write on. Now, by having their own working copy, they will be able to notate examples in the text that they find important for supporting their reactions while discussing their experiences with their peers and with the class as a whole. The same can be applied for the listening portion. They may decide to document a different example. And saying that, I'm going to go ahead and take a moment and I'm going to add highlighters, because as I'm doing this, I'm thinking that it may be beneficial for each student to have 2 different color highlighters, so perhaps yellow and green, so that they can highlight what in the text catches their attention in the portion when they read it to themselves versus the audio experience. That way they're able to easily spot what was different, what caught their eye between the initial reading activity and then listening to the audio. Since this lesson revolves entirely around the experience and comparing and contrasting reading a text versus being an audience, listening to it or observing it. Okay, that completes that portion. And let me move on to the evaluation portion of the lesson plan. How and when do I plan to evaluate student learning on the content of this lesson? Formative assessment will occur throughout the lesson as students are working with their partners and in their small groups. By circulating in the classroom as students work and discuss, I will be able to provide feedback to students and redirect any students who are straying from the assigned tasks. I think that it's very easy for students to stray, particularly if you have students who are perhaps a bit more advanced. They read faster than other students. They might complete the task in a shorter amount of time. So by being able to provide feedback, I can redirect perhaps students that complete the task ahead of time into a new higher thinking question that can maybe take them to the next level of complexity as far as their response. As groups contribute their discussion points during the report back session, the students will be assessed on their participation and their responses. I think it's important that students be encouraged to participate at all levels. And that's part of the reason why I chose to do the lesson this way, where it slowly builds up to class discussion, so that at that point, students are feeling a bit more comfortable. And that will allow me to assess their progress a little bit better. Now, based on the group discussion assessment, further questions can be posed in order to close any gaps in the group contributions. By observing students throughout the completion of the assigned tasks, I will be able to evaluate their ability to vocalize their experiences and their understanding of the text. The final independent assessment will be completed by a journal entry in which the students will summarize their understanding of the completed task and will be able to document their experiences with the text. At this point, they'll be able to tell me if they feel they've reached the objective, and if they have, in what way. Now, why have I chosen this approach for evaluation? I've chosen this approach for evaluation because it will best help evaluate the understanding of the group as a whole and of each individual student. By completing several assessments throughout the lesson, I will be able to best evaluate the extent to which students are interacting with the text and with their peers, because part of this lesson, I think, is not only working with text, but being able to interact with your peers and being able to communicate your thoughts and your experiences. So I think a continuous evaluation will help me understand and clearly see if students are meshing well together and working towards the common goal. Now, by incorporating an independent assessment, I will best be able to evaluate the success in achieving the outlined objectives by each student. Any necessary follow-up for each individual or the class as a whole will be based on the individual assessment. This has completed my lesson plan explanation. I look forward to your feedback. Thank you so much and have a great